Dustin Poirier takes on Islam Makhachev for that UFC lightweight belt. Now he's against another Russian, as his first crack at the lightweight title was against Khabib. Now I do feel like you have to know who Dustin Poirier is. If you don't, you don't follow UFC, because Dustin Poirier has been going at it for years in the UFC. He is such a well-stabled name now, and this guy started all the way in 2011 in the UFC. I repeat, 2011. That is so many years. That is 13 years to be exact. Hold up, let me do my math. Yeah, that's 13 years. And he started the first day of 2011 against Josh Grisby at UFC 125, and now he's fighting at UFC 302. Now, this fight is a very interesting one because of just who Dustin Poirier is and the amount of evolved changes he's made in his career. Now, although his last fight in this weight class was 9 years ago, I do want to go back to featherweight Dustin Poirier, the first fight against Josh Grisby, and he's had a tale of fighters that he's fought, the likes of Max Holloway, Korean Zombie, Cub Swanson, Diego Brandao, and finally ending that featherweight stint against Conor McGregor, where he gets knocked out in the first. And we see a Dustin Poirier that really exchanged wins and exchanged losses. We have 3 losses in the Dustin Poirier featherweight stint. So 8-3 as a UFC featherweight is honestly not the worst record to have. However, he did lose to the really big guys. He lost to Korean Zombie, he lost to Cub Swanson, he lost to Conor. And honestly, against the Conor one, you see the issues with Dustin Poirier, where he was just a very aggressive and not like a very quick-tempered guy. Compared to the Dustin that we know of now, he let Conor McGregor get into his head, and that's what led to that first round knockout. But this version of Dustin was not the fighter that we see now. He was not really he was a boxer, he was a great striker, but he did not mind going to the ground. He did not mind chasing wrestling, as against Max Holloway, he got a first round submission, and before that against Pablo Garza, he also got a submission. He actually went on a stint of 3 submissions in a row in that featherweight stint. And Dustin was honestly a completely different fighter to what he is now. But after that Conor fight, we saw a change in Dustin, and I think the first change he made was, I can't make 145 anymore. 145 was draining Dustin.
I mean, you were a big 145. Like, how rough was that cut?
It was horrible. I would walk around 190.
Jesus
I get up to 190.
Some of these weight cut videos of Dustin on the scale, you can just tell that he is sucked in. He's been dieting all month, and he still has trouble making 145. So he made the move up, and in his first fight, he fought a guy in Diego Ferreira, which he just won against Mateusz Rebecki, one of the better lightweight prospects, a prospect that I've been very high on. Diego Ferreira is another one of those guys that's been there for a while, and he finished Diego Ferreira in the first round, and he started a 4-fight winning streak in lightweight with the names of Joe Duffy, Yancy Medeiros, and Bobby Green. We finally see glimpses of the Dustin that we know of, this southpaw striker that doesn't mind brawling, but he's also a very technical fighter, and the in-close boxing of Dustin was just revolutionary to his game, as this inside boxing of Dustin was just levels ahead of people. He was not level against one person, and that's the mythical fighter of Michael Johnson when he's against a high UFC lightweight, because Michael Johnson puts him out in the first almost beautifully. I mean, with the counter hook, completely negating Dustin, making him fall, making him drop almost instantly. And Michael Johnson is one of those fighters that on his days can beat anybody. I think Michael Johnson could beat Francis Ngannou if he's at 100%. So Michael Johnson is one of those weird losses where, although yes, his record is not very pleasing, Michael Johnson's record, his resume is honestly tip top. It's one of the greater UFC lightweight resumes in terms of the amount of people he has fought, the amount of people he has fought in the lightweight division. And it ended with Dustin Poirier getting knocked out, and we also see a run from Dustin that is one of the more underrated runs in the UFC lightweight division. I mean, we are talking banger after banger from Dustin Poirier, from Jim Miller to Eddie Alvarez to Anthony Pettis to Justin Gaethje, Eddie Alvarez again, Max Holloway, and then eventually to that Khabib title. But I want to talk about that run because in that run we saw 3 knockouts. We saw a decision against Jim Miller, which was a super close one, but was a very fun fight. I mean, this is a Dustin that was putting on exciting performances while looking amazing. I mean, the Eddie Alvarez no contest, Dustin was looking great. Dustin was starting to get into his groove that we did see in the second fight. And that's when Eddie threw that illegal knee. And although I do think knees to the grounded opponent is kind of bullshit, because you have people like Aljamain Sterling who is able to get into that turtle position after failing a takedown, I do think that was a really bad one. That was a really bad knee from Eddie Alvarez. And that kind of put kind of a weird look in Dustin Poirier's win streak, because he ends up winning 4 right after that, and one of them being Eddie Alvarez in spectacular fashion. And another wrinkle to Dustin Poirier's game is when this guy smells blood, it's game over. I mean, the combos that he puts on when you are hurt opponents, we're talking same side combos, we're talking 15 pieces, we're talking Mortal Kombat finish him type performances against Justin Gaethje, where he puts on an incredible barrage of strikes, finishing Justin Gaethje, which is, if your name's not Max Holloway, is really hard to do. The only way you can finish Justin is if he is dead tired in front of you. That's what happened to Eddie Alvarez. That's what happened in those types of fights. But Dustin flat out knocked him cold, where Justin had to get stopped by the ref because Justin is just too tough for his own good. Max Holloway is the only person to absolutely spark Justin Gaethje, but the guy that was second was Dustin Poirier. I mean, that was a very close fight where if Dustin had no ref, I mean, Justin Gaethje is getting put out cold. And then we almost have a repeat of Dustin Poirier absolutely laying it on against Eddie Alvarez, where when he smelled blood, he did the same exact thing. Same side combos, 15 punches, finish him, brutality. Like, it was the greatest glimpses of what Dustin Poirier can do if you try to strike with him, because Dustin Poirier in just flat out striking is one of the more craftier and one of the toughest guys to beat. And even when he didn't get a knockout in that long run that I'm talking about, he had a banger of a match against Max Holloway, which it was unanimous that he did win, but it was a very fun fight, and it kind of tells less of what Dustin can do and more or less how good Max Holloway is, because his chin was just not going away. That man is made of Hawaiian steel. I don't know if that's even a thing, but he does not get knocked out. And Dustin Poirier tried. I mean, he tried his hardest and it did not go well. But that led him on to the title shot against Khabib, where although Dustin did have that guillotine, I'll talk about that gilly later, don't get me wrong, but Khabib just outmauled him. Khabib outworked him and showed why he is one of the best lightweights of all time, because Khabib was able to take Dustin out of his own game and proceed to just maul him. That is the Khabib blueprint, was just maul. In that fight, after the fight, we see a very emotional Dustin Poirier, and I would like to say that this was the switch of Dustin, but I don't think so just yet. I think Dustin started to realize right then and here that maybe going for the title is not the greatest thing, because going for the title, it leads to too much downfall. And I think the skill set of Dustin can definitely win a title, but there's so many people in this shark of a division of lightweight, where you have guys like Khabib at the time, you had Justin Gaethje, you had Eddie Alvarez, which Dustin Poirier did get through those guys, but then you had Charles Oliveira, you had those big name guys that just, Dustin is in that S tier, but very low of the S tier, where he beats everyone in the top 3, everyone in that top 5 all the way down, but he just cannot get to the title. And that's been the narrative with Dustin Poirier. Can he finish his story? Can he get to this title shot? But we still see the same Dustin of putting on absolute bangers in his next fight after Khabib, where he fought Dan Hooker. If you guys don't know, I am a very big Dan Hooker fan. I absolutely love the way he fights, but Dan Hooker just got outworked, got outpaced, and in that 5th round, Dan Hooker looked horrible. And I think that completely changed who Dan Hooker was. I think Dustin changed who Dan Hooker was going to fight for the rest of his life, as we've never really seen Dan Hooker at that top level. Because if anyone can remember in that 2020 time period, Dan Hooker was that guy. Dan Hooker was looking to be one of those top 3 guys, and he was looking well against Dustin. He was looking absolutely amazing, but then he got tired, and that's when Dustin laid it on. And it showed that Dustin can do this for 5 rounds. Dustin can lay it on and throw these big power punches for 5 straight rounds. And I think that is the main catalyst of why Dustin Poirier is so good in this lightweight division, where he has exceptional boxing. He has the grit for it. He has really good leg kicks, which I'll get to next. But he can do it for 5 rounds. He can do it for 25 minutes. He can do it for 15 minutes, all while maintaining that power. And we saw that against Dan Hooker, where he was able to go to war and outlast Dan Hooker, who is a very tough motherfucker, but just not tough enough for Dustin Poirier. And this is where I think the switch of Dustin Poirier happened, because although after Khabib he beats Dan Hooker, there was a real big lull of what Dustin Poirier can do, almost where Max Holloway was when Volk was reigning, because the Khabib fight showed that Dustin just does not have the ability to beat Khabib. Dustin just does not have that sort of skill set. So what does Dustin do? Dustin goes and fights a former foe, the guy that took him out of the featherweight division, Conor McGregor. And that's where he gets his money, because in that first round, Conor looked amazing, but Dustin started investing in calf kicks. And I do want to point out to that in the fight against Islam, because Islam is a orthodox fighter, but he also fights southpaw a lot. And as that southpaw versus southpaw, that calf kick, that outside kick is very open. It is very easy to get to there. So I do think Dustin will try to chop down on Islam's legs. The only scare though is exactly what happened to Justin Gaethje when he was chopping down Khabib's legs, where Khabib was able to catch the leg and get the takedowns. And with a guy like Dustin, he's gonna pull that ghillie. I mean, it's gonna happen at some point, and he's gonna try to go for the finish. This guy is the highlight. I mean, Justin Gaethje's nickname is the highlight. This Dustin Poirier's nickname is the diamond highlight. I mean, at this point, because his fights are just looking to be finished. His fights are looking to be insane. And against Conor McGregor, he was able to chop down on that leg kick, how I predict him to chop down Islam's legs and get the finish and get that stop. Then we have this third fight, the trilogy, where I don't really want to count it because obviously Conor did get hurt, but Dustin was looking great in that first. He was able to use his wrestling, and I don't think that's going to happen in the Islam fight, but it is always a possibility. Maybe he feels Dustin Pourmagomedov and just starts hammering on Islam, but I really don't think that's ever going to happen. And then once again, we have the story and the main culprit of Dustin Poirier, where he cannot finish the story. He cannot get to that lightweight belt. He gets everywhere but that lightweight belt as he loses to Charles Oliveira. And by finish, Charles Oliveira finishes him, and this was the historic run of Charles Oliveira, where he beats Michael Chandler, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, and then he eventually loses the belt to Islam. Charles Oliveira is a top-notch guy, and it showed once again that Dustin is at that S tier, but he's all the way at the bottom of S tier. He just can't beat the champion. Now, the switch that I was talking about with McGregor, I feel like also had an effect when he did lose to Charles, because although he was looking for the title and he always said, I'm always going to look for the title, you see a shift where Dustin becomes more of a finisher or a brawler than more of a technical boxer that he was in his earlier stints. Although he does smell blood in his earlier stints and then starts pouring it on, before that, Dustin wasn't a brawler. He was throwing a lot of combinations, but it was very crisp, very beautiful boxing. But against Michael Chandler and on, we see a Dustin that really wings out a lot of punches. And I think the Conor fight got to him because the money started reeling in and he wanted to be more entertaining than he was being a title holder, being a title contender. And against Chandler, we saw a brawl of the century where Dustin Poirier was able to brawl it out and beat Chandler by submission in the third round. Now, this is the same Dustin we always see, this southpaw Dustin, where he's going to wing out these hooks, he's going to get those crosses, he's going to get the cross to switch stance to a hook so he can close the distance. That is something that southpaws love doing, as a southpaw myself. And I do think that Dustin did change, but he still was a finisher. Now, I want to talk about the Justin Gaethje loss real quick, because this is one of the first losses in this historic lightweight run where he lost to a non-champion. Michael Johnson finished him, but he wasn't even close to the title yet. When he got close to this title, when he's in this top 5, this is the first time somebody actually beat him that wasn't a title holder. This was for the BMF belt, but it was not an actual title holder. Justin Gaethje head kicked him to next week, head kicked him all the way into this shot against Benoit Saint-Denis. And Benoit Saint-Denis was really a test of, does Dustin have it anymore? Does Dustin even have the ability to compete against these top 5 guys? Getting knocked out like he did against Justin Gaethje could be detrimental to most fighters' games, not Dustin's, because Dustin, although he weathered the Benoit Saint-Denis storm, because I do think Benoit is a very talented fighter, he ended up pouring it on him. He ended up getting that knockout. But we have to talk about these guillotines against Islam. Dustin Poirier, I think, maybe broke a record. I mean, he had to, of most guillotine attempts in a fight, because he attempted it every single time Benoit Saint-Denis got to his legs. And against Islam, it's just not something smart to do. Although Islam is a very underrated striker, and I hope Andy gets to that point, Islam is a very underrated striker. Islam cannot compete with Dustin in the striking. I just don't think it's a possibility, because Dustin has done it for years. You can be a very well-developed striker, but when you do it for years, you see the differences. You see the differences of experiences. Some of Islam's tendencies of being a grappler first always appear when Islam is on the back foot. It always appears when Islam is in trouble. Those are tendencies that Dustin Poirier can definitely exploit in and get the finish, get maybe a 5-round decision against Islam. But it's not going to be an easy fight, and I don't think guillotines are the answer. Dustin, I will repeat this. I don't think guillotines are the answer. Do not pull a guillotine against Islam. It's just not worth the trouble of, if you can't get the guillotine, you have one of the top tier grapplers who isn't like Khabib. Khabib is a maul type of fighter. Islam is such a flow heavy guy that he can submit you way easier than Khabib can submit you. Khabib, his submission game was not that complex. Although he showed extraordinary levels of jiu-jitsu, he was a smash your head in and you will give me the position. While Islam is, I will cruise with you in the bottom and I'll eventually get to what I want, but I am going to let you work. I am not going to smash your head in. It's a different level of grappling that these two have, and it's not worth pulling a guillotine against Islam, because I think it is way more dangerous to be on the bottom of Islam's game than Khabib's. Not in terms of damage, but in terms of finishing the fight for sure, because Islam is a finisher. Islam is going to look for the submission, while Khabib is just going to smash your head in. I do think it's difficult to be at the bottom of Islam with a guy that can just kind of cruise with you. He's not a guy that gets another takedown, gets 8 takedowns in a match. He's a guy that gets 1, and that 1 lasts the whole round. That's how good Islam's game is, and I don't think that Dustin Poirier can even try to go to the ground. I don't think Dustin should even pull a guillotine. I think he should just defend, and leave it in the stand-up game. And that's where Dustin Poirier can prosper. That's where Dustin Poirier can look his best, in the stand-up, looking great from that southpaw position, throwing those calf kicks, throwing those switch combinations. I think Dustin can look amazing in this fight if he can fight smart. Dustin Poirier has shown very low level of fight IQ ever since the Conor McGregor fight, where he decides to brawl it out instead of actually being the technical boxer that he once was. And I do think the technical boxing side of Dustin Poirier can win him this fight against Islam. However, I am doubting Dustin Poirier, but he has proven to us in his last fight against Benoit Saint-Denis that you can't count this guy out. Everyone was counting him out. He was a 2-1 underdog against Benoit Saint-Denis, a guy who hasn't even fought in the top 10 of the lightweight division, and everyone thought Benoit was going to cruise to a win, and Dustin Poirier proved everyone wrong. So we cannot doubt this guy. We have to stop doubting who Dustin Poirier is, because Dustin Poirier is a fighter. He is the diamond, and I do think that there's always going to be a chance for the diamond to shine. Guys, let me know how you feel about Dustin Poirier. Let me know how you feel about him against Islam. Leave it in the comments. If there's anything else you guys are looking to watch, let me know. I'm glad to make more videos. It's been Santi. It's been Studs.